We're going to be in chapter 7 today, which means that we're halfway through this book. There's 12 chapters. 6 have gone by. 6 are to come. There's going to be a couple changes at this point in the book. One is that as we get to verse 28 of chapter 7, we're going to go back to Hebrew from Aramaic. Now, what you do with that, I don't know. But if you remember about verse 4 of chapter 2, we go from the writing being in the original copies, going from Hebrew to Aramaic, and then in verse 28 here in 7, it's going to go back to Hebrew. So we're still in Aramaic today. We're going to take half this chapter. The other change is that the first 6 chapters were basically historic genre or narrative. So it was storytelling for the most part, historic storytelling. This is the moment a lot of you have been waiting for. This is the moment that the pastors have not been waiting for, because we now go from historic narrative in the first 6 chapters to apocalyptic language and narrative in the last 6. There's a lot of debate that goes on here. There's a lot of controversy that goes on here. We will probably disappoint you with both of them. There's 2 mistakes that we can make as Christians that I have made and am still prone to make when it comes to eschatology, which just means end times, or apocalyptic language, which is apocalyptic, imagery. That is that number 1, we can make it everything, or number 2, we can make it nothing. That's Christians usually fall into one of those camps where there's a lot of people who take prophecy and end-time stuff and apocalyptic language and they major on it. It's all they think about, it's all they talk about. They go home and they draw graphs and charts and timelines and try to crack codes. And they think that they have these things like this, the understanding in a closed fist. And we need to be careful with that, okay? On the other side, we've got people who say you can't know anything, really, until it happens. So why even bother? Some of the greatest theologians and scholars in church history that wrote commentaries on the entire Bible would skip 2, Daniel and Revelation. These are the most brilliant men that know their Bibles, and there's a reason they didn't comment on those chapters. So us as pastors this morning, we're going to tread lightly going through these last 6 chapters. We have lots of reading today again. I'm not going to take this whole chapter. There's no way that I can. So Brent's going to come in next week, and he's going to pick up where I leave off. I think we're going to try to get through the first 18 verses. That's what we're going to do. So unfortunately, we have to split this one narrative in half. But I think we're going to be able to do it just fine. So let's go ahead and read 1 through 8. Let's start with that. Daniel chapter 7, verses 1 through 8 says, "In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions of his head as he lay in his bed. And then he wrote down the dream and he told the sum of the matter. Daniel, verse 2, declared, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. And 4 great beasts came up out of the sea, different from one another. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. And then as I looked, its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. And the mind of a man was given to it. And behold, another beast, a second one like a bear. It was raised up on one side. It had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth, and it was told, Arise, devour much flesh. And after this I looked, and behold, another like a leopard with 4 wings and a bird on its back. 4 wings of a bird on its back. And the beast had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. And after this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, terrifying and dreadful and exceedingly strong. And it had great iron teeth. It devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. It was different from all the other beasts that were before it. And it had 10 horns. And I considered the horns. And behold, there came up among them another horn, a little one, before which 3 of the first horns were plucked up by its roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and the mouth speaking great things. Now, what we have in the book of Daniel a lot of times are parallel chapters. It's kind of weird. They actually kind of come in twos. So when you have the fiery furnace and the lion's den, those two narratives are basically unpacking the same thing. When you have chapter 2 where Nebuchadnezzar has this dream of a statue with 4 different minerals that change as they go down, that's a parallel to this, chapter 7. The only difference is that this is Daniel's dream, not Nebuchadnezzar's. This chapter actually parallels chapter 2. In other words, we're talking about, we don't have a lot of guesswork to do here, the same empires that were being talked about in 2 that God showed to Nebuchadnezzar. So this time Daniel gets the dream. It's intended for him, right? And so he writes it down so that it could be recalled and shared. This is kind of cool. I mean, God did that. God's the ultimate author with a big A, capital A, over everything that's in our Bible, but it's kind of neat that Daniel wrote this thing down because you and I are sitting here today reading his dream, you know. He saved it. So now he's able to recall it. And it is here that we start to drift heavily into apocalyptic descriptions, meaning imagery, symbolism, which means that it is here that we must be careful not to walk away with an interpretation of these things that we're seeing, reading with complete literalism, right? I think we all know that. I think we know as we're reading what we just read, like, you can't take this completely literally. If you can, then this is scary. You know what I mean? This is beyond terrifying, but we can't do that. We can't walk away with stuff beyond what Daniel actually gives us as far as interpretation. Furthermore, it is with this symbolic language that we must float to other apocalyptic writings, which again, some of you are going to be happy about, right? We have to do that in order to find the consistencies in the uses of the imagery or the symbolism. And so if you want to right now, you can take a finger and you can stick it in the book of Revelation, and you can keep that finger there because we're going to be popping over there quite a bit, and I'm not going to wait. I'm sorry, I'll say what verses I'm going to, but for the sake of time, I'm probably just going to be bumping and moving. So, for instance, we start off here, verse 2, in Daniel 7, with Daniel seeing the 4 winds of heaven. Now, how might we know what that is? The 4 winds of heaven. And of course, we don't want to sit around here and guess, right? We want to see if we see it referenced somewhere else, which we actually do. The bad news is it's in other apocalyptic writing, but you start to see patterns, right? And out of that, we can start to maybe gain some knowledge on those things. So if I pop over to Revelation chapter 7, verse 1, we see this. After this, John says, I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding back the 4 winds of the earth, so that no wind might blow on earth or against any tree. And if you read on, do you know what's about to happen there, what the context is? Kaka is about to hit the fan. God's about to pour out his wrath. So first, God wants to make sure that he marks off, in this case, these 144,000 Israelites, which is something else we're not going to talk about that's mysterious. But he wants them sealed, and he wants them marked off, right, set apart, before he starts pouring out his wrath on the earth. And somehow it has to do with this wind. These angels are holding back the wind, right, so that they can go and mark these guys off before wrath comes, okay? So that kind of tips us off a little bit to what wind might represent when it comes to apocalyptic language, which is a stirring, basically. In this case of God's wrath, of trouble, of turmoil on the nations, right? And so this fits pretty well with what we have here in Daniel. What might the wind represent? Most likely a tension or an unrest, okay? So if you ever look at a lake, or you look at a swimming pool, or you look at whatever, when there's no wind in the air, that water's pretty calm, right? And if it's windy, then the water gets rough. It gets turbulent. This is kind of the idea behind this here, all right? And so there's these 4 winds that are stirred up here in Daniel's vision. And then there's the Great Sea, okay? So then you have the imagery of water, wind, water, kind of like I just used. But what does the Great Sea usually represent in apocalyptic language if you go other places. If I went back and read more of Revelation 7:1, which I'm not going to for the sake of time, it then goes over into the sea is what this wind is going to blow on, which represents nations, not water. So the whole idea between the wind and the sea here at the beginning is that there's going to be turbulence or unrest on the nations. We good? All right. Again, this is going to be super quick. This is going to be super quick. The way that I run through this, I'm not going to do a lot of justice to it, but we don't, for the sake of time, we're going to go fast. You'll have to go home, do your homework, listen back to it, or look back at these things, right? So in Daniel's dream, then we have these 4 beasts that he sees emerge from which is also a tip-off that we're talking about nations, right? Because if you cheated and you looked ahead into chapter 7, who are the 4 beasts? Okay, no one cheated? Seriously? This is rad. Kings. They're kings. That's what we're going to see. And kings don't come out of the ocean, right? They come out of, civilization. So again, it confirms the imagery of the great sea equaling nations, okay? So in 17, we have 4 kings who arise out of the earth. That's where the cheat is. Thus, it's reasonable to interpret the sea or the great sea in apocalyptic texts as nations, the place where humans occupy. So these 4 beasts pop up, and they appear to Daniel like creatures that you would see out of a movie like Clash of the Titans. I remember that as a kid. I remember thinking like the imagery in that was so weird because of the creatures that were in. If you go back and look at it now, it's pretty bad. Not good, not good special effects. But at the time, it was stinking rad. And that's what this reminds me of when you start like looking at the descriptions of these beasts. Is something crazy like that, these big hybrid monsters, right? The first one is a lion with eagle's wings until the wings get removed. And then this thing stands up on its feet like a man. And I want you to notice here in apocalyptic language, again, I want to go back to literalism, how we don't take things literally. You have these little words like in verse 4, the first was like. 2 little words, was like. What's that telling you? It was like it, but this isn't what it was. It's telling us that someone's trying to describe something that they don't know how to describe, okay? And this is why we stay away from being pure literalists when we read apocalyptic language. So he sees a lion with eagle's wings until the wings were removed. Again, if you parallel this directly with Nebuchadnezzar's dream and the interpretation of that dream in chapter 2, this represents Babylon. The Babylonian Empire, this represents him, King Nebuchadnezzar. He is this first beast that's being talked about, who literally went from a beast to a man. From all 4s on the ground, basically. The description was even of him having hair so long that it looked like eagle's feathers, right? And then after 7 years, God restores him and stands him back up on his feet like a man, right? So we have Babylon, okay? The second was like a bear with 3 ribs in its mouth, hungry little bear. It's got ribs sticking out of its mouth. We learned in chapter 2, this belongs to Cyrus. King Cyrus, the Medo-Persian Empire. That would be the one who came in. The 3 ribs, most likely referring to their 3 biggest conquests on their way to world domination, which was Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar. They're the ones who took over Babylon, Lydia, Egypt. 3 ribs. Okay, those were the 3 main empires that they conquered to become the big boys in town. Third, we have a leopard with 4 wings on its back and 4 heads. This is Greece. And Greece was known due to the swiftness in which they conquered the known world, okay? So if you had a leopard that's really fast, and then you stuck like wings on its back to make it faster, that's something that's very fast. Alexander the Great, that's what he's known for in history, right? We all know that, is the quickness in which he dominated the world and rose to power, okay? So Babylon, 1, Medo-Persia, 2, Greece, three, and then there's a fourth beast that is more dreadful, more sinister, more powerful than the previous three that had iron teeth and 10 horns. Who is this? Yeah, it's the Roman Empire. This would be the Roman Empire, which just happened to be the ruling, reigning, conquering empire at the time of Jesus' arrival, right? The Messiah's arrival. And of course, this fourth beast sounds a lot like the beast of Revelation 13 that John sees in Revelation 13, rising out of the Great Sea, right? And that one that John sees in Revelation 13 has 10 horns and 7 heads, right? And interestingly, if you look at the description, though, of John's beast that he sees in Revelation 13, it actually contains in the description all of the characteristics of all 4 of these beasts. That's what's kind of interesting about it. So it looks like a leopard, looks like a bear, but it's the one with the beast with 10 horns that comes out of the sea. Kind of interesting. Again, you can go and have fun with it. I'm not going to make any literal comments on it. All right. However, with all of this imagery that's going on, okay, with these 4 beasts that Daniel's taking in and observing here, it's really this little horn that catches Daniel's eye, that catches Daniel's attention. It stands out because it seemed different than everything else that he was saying. And he tells us why. It was different to him in that it resembled more of that of a man than a beast, coming out of a beast, right? And this is, this little horn of Daniel is the subject of great debate when it comes to last time's thing. Luckily, part of the reason I wanted to cut my sermon off halfway through the chapters so that Brent would have to take the bulk of this. So if you have problems with like his interpretation of the little horn, like it's on him. You know, no, I'm just kidding. We all sit around and talk about this stuff together. Like all the pastors, when we get our text and then we sit around and talk about it. But so this is going to be kind of the primary focal point of Daniel in this dream. He can't get his mind off of this little horn, you know, that comes up late. So anyway, is this trippy enough so far? All right. I used to love stuff like this when I was, back in the day. Yeah. All right. Let's go 9 through 11, okay? Little shift. As I looked, thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. And his clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. And his throne was fiery flames, and its wheels were burning fire. And a stream of fire issued and came out from before him. 1,000 thousands served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. And the court sat in judgment, and the books were opened. And then I looked, because of the sound of the great words that the horn was speaking. As I looked, the beast was killed, and its body destroyed and given over to be burned with fire. But as for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. So all of a sudden, Daniel's vision shifts abruptly, right, from that which is happening on earth to that which is happening in heaven. And the first thing that he sees is that thrones were placed, plural. Which is interesting because then he just focuses on the one who sits on the throne. And I think, again, if you go to places like Revelation chapter 4 and Revelation chapter 20, you can have a good idea of maybe even how many thrones there were and who was sitting on them. We would call them the 24 elders, you know. So anyway, for another day, not today. The question is, why? Why is he seeing thrones, right? Like, who sits on thrones? And what's interesting is that what we just saw in his previous vision that he got first is a vision of 4 kings coming out of, but now he's seeing a whole different vision of a whole different brand of kings. And so we know what kings do. They rule, right? So we have kings on earth first, contrasted by kings in heaven, but of course, one king in particular that he calls the Ancient of Days. And it's interesting that we note that this is really a dream, something that God's giving Daniel to contrast kings on earth with kings in heavenly places, right? Because if you can grab onto that, you will start to see that the theme or the purpose of the intended narrative develop in what it is that God wants to show Daniel in what the whole point is of God giving Daniel this dream. And of course, we're going to circle back to this. And so Daniel sees this one that he calls the Ancient of Days. I love this title. I think it's absolutely amazing. It's pretty unique to Daniel. But he identifies him as the Ancient of Days, and he sees him take his seat. He watches him sit down. Guess who this is? It's God. It's the Lord. It's Yahweh. It's Jehovah. It's the ancient. It's the voice of the burning bush. It's the Lord. And this is a unique, like I said, title to Daniel for the Lord because of what it implies. But my question is, like, how did Daniel know that this was the Ancient of Days? You know what I mean? That's always kind of weird to me or puzzling to me. You know what I mean? He's dreaming, he's got this vision, he sees this, all of a sudden he's like, this is the Ancient of Days, and it's like, did he have a name tag on? Or like a t-shirt, or like a plank on it, like a plaque on his throne? You know what I mean? Like, and I just can't help to think that once you see him, once you encounter him, it's just unmistakable. You know what I mean? Like, I know that in my life. I've never seen him with my eyes, but I have encountered him. I have seen him in my life. And it's unmistakable when he shows up. It's unmistakable when he talks. It's unmistakable when it's him. You know what I mean? And it's probably just that simple. That he's just so unique. He's so unlike anything or anyone else you've ever known and ever encountered that you cannot mistake him when you see him. And Daniel just looks and he goes, the Ancient of Days sat down. You know what I mean? He knows who it is. He knows who it is, right? But we do know, we don't know how he knew, but we do know the implications of the title, right? The Ancient of Days, that it would belong to God, that it would belong to Jehovah, that would be a title for Yahweh, the one who always was. That's what it's saying. The one who always was, the one with no beginning, the one who transcends all kings and all kingdoms and all empires that ever were or ever will be, including the 4 that Daniel's now being shown in his dream, right? He's the one who transcends all of it. And in verses 9 and 10, Daniel gives us a brief description of him, which just happens to sound an awful lot like the description others have given the Lord when they've encountered him, including the one John gives in Revelation chapter 1, right? He hears a loud voice behind him. He turns to look to see who the voice was, and he says, I saw one like the Son of Man, clothed with a long robe and with a golden sash around his chest, and the hairs of his head were white, like white wool, like snow, and his eyes were like a flame of fire. His feet were like burnished bronze, refined in a furnace, and his voice was like the roar of many waters. It sounds familiar, right? Sounds like the one that Daniel is seeing here in chapter 7. And my thought is like, wow, like how do you look at something like that and live? You know what I mean? How do you not just crumble up? Remember Indiana Jones? Gosh, that freaked me out as a kid, like with the face melting, like just because of the glory of God. You know, how does your face not melt? You know what I mean? When you behold such a thing. I don't know how that was PG, by the way. Now that I'm an adult and I look back at that scene, I'm like, wow, because it was kind of traumatizing. Anyway, but you start to see this with God over and over again. White, the hair white as wool, the robes, the clothing white as snow, which represents righteousness. Just completely righteous. No impurities exist there, right? And what's neat is you and I are going to get to put one of these on someday. It's like pretty rad. Actually, we have it now before God, but we're going to actually get to put it on one day, right? Now, most kings have like a decent size cabinet or contingent of people that they put around them to serve them and perform various acts of service to meet their needs, but the Ancient of Days has an army, actively. It's an army. The one that Daniel sees here has 1,000 thousands attending to him as he sits upon his throne. How much is 1,000 thousands? A lot. I have no idea. This is a big number, right? And not only are his team of like servants vast in number, but then you've got this amount of people that are in attendance before him, right, for this event. Like it's overwhelming. It's an uncountable number. This throne room does not seem to have like any limits when it comes to capacity, right? The Deschutes County regulators have not been here yet to put up a sign, right? Like this is innumerable, right? This attendance is incalculable. And I mean, like, what if a fire breaks out? That could be dangerous, right? No one laughed. Don't you get it? Because a stream of fire proceeds. All right, you guys stink. I thought it was going to be funny when I thought of it. Thought it was going to be great. It's not. So it's a court, and then the court sat in what? The court sits in what? The court sits in judgment, and the books are opened, right? So here's what we can assume about what's going down here. It's a trial. This is a trial, the courtroom. And if we don't know that a trial is about to, if we know that a trial is about to take place, it makes it all the more interesting to consider who might be sitting on the other thrones, which I think we already talked about briefly. You can go look into that, but probably the 24 elders. So you've got the 12 tribes of Israel represented, and you've got the 12 apostles represented, which would make up the 24 elders. You can go dig into that and find that. But as far as the books, this is the thing, right? Like, what are the books? What's in the books? You know what I mean? Like, what's in? And I think it may be safe for us to guess based on what we get out of Revelation 20, what they may be. Again, we don't hold things like this when it comes to these kind of writings, but we can maybe get a pretty good idea in certain places. Revelation 20, starting in verse 11, says this, "And I saw a great white throne, and him who was seated on it. From his presence the earth and the sky fled away, and no place was found for them. And I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and books, plural, were opened. And then another book was opened." So John's distinguishing one book from these other books, plural, right? And the dead were judged, this other book was open, kind of got to add this part, which is the book of life. Which is the book of life. And the dead were judged by what was written in the books, plural, according to what they had done. So, one of the books present in Daniel's vision, because I personally believe John and Daniel are seeing and describing the same thing, okay? Personally. So one of the books present, we might assume, is the book of life, right? The others, we might assume, is the book of works. They are books of works containing the works of all people, everywhere, for all time. Maybe good and bad. I don't know. But that's pretty much what we seem to be having here. So, and as much as it would be fun to just go more into the books right now, we're not going to. We've got to keep moving, all right? So court's in session, and evidence is presented, right? Books of records are opened up, which should scare some of us. Even me a little bit. This sounds like the great white throne judgment. And it's interesting to think that God gave Daniel this vision of this grand event first, like before John got it. Because Revelation gets so much love for these things, as if it's its own thing. But the truth is, like, Daniel was shown much of this stuff first. Nevertheless, as Daniel's peeking into this divine courtroom setting, his attention is turned once again back to this annoying little horn, right? And it's there. I don't know. It keeps drawing his attention because he's noisy. You know what I mean? Like, he's annoying. The dude has like big things to say, and he has a lot of things to say. Right? So it seems like he's creating like quite a stir and making quite an impact with that which is coming out of him, with that which he's saying. And yet, as he observes the little horn, Daniel, he sees the fourth beast, which the little horn proceeded from, get destroyed and scorched. So that which brought forth the little horn, Daniel then sees killed and destroyed. Confused yet? All right, good. So now, according to what Daniel tells us, we no longer have a fourth beast at this point of the dream, but simply the horn, the late horn, the 11th horn, that remains. Well, what about the other three beasts, right? Well, we're told in verse 12 what happened there. We read that. Nothing really special happens. In fact, we can look at it historically, right? We're on the backside of, historically, those kings and those empires. And what happened? Well, they rose to power for a season, they got great for a season, and then someone else came along who was stronger. and more powerful. And then they reigned for a season. And then someone else came along who was more powerful. And that's basically what's being told to us here in verse 12. The numbers, the numerology, whatever you want to call it, of a season and a time, doesn't have any special, I believe, or hidden significance. It's a song by the birds. You know what I mean? And Ecclesiastes 3:1 tells us to everything there's a season and a time for every purpose under heaven. And so really all that's being communicated here is that each of those first three beasts were just there for a specific season and a specific time. That's it. Nothing else crazy about it. All right, final section. Ready? We're doing all right. We're doing all right. Time-wise. 13. Let's just read 13 to 18. I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like a son of man. And he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all people, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. Verse 15, as for me, Daniel, my spirit within me was anxious, and the visions of my head alarmed me. And I approached one of those who stood there and asked him the truth concerning all of this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of the things. These four great beasts are four kings who shall arise out of the earth, but the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, forever, and ever. So, first Daniel introduces us to the Ancient of Days, the first time he has this throne room vision. Now he introduces us to what we could call the cloud rider, right? The one who rides on the clouds, the cloud rider. And who is the cloud rider? It's Jesus. It's the Son of God. It's Jesus. And what's interesting is that Daniel sees him, the cloud rider, coming to the Ancient of Days. Coming to the Ancient of Days. And the question might be, if Jesus is coming to the Ancient of Days, where's he been? Where is he coming from? Right? Like what's he been up to? And I'm glad that you asked, because I'm going to read something that I think is intriguing in light of this, and you can just listen. But yeah, I'm going to Revelation again, and I want to read something out of Revelation chapter 5, which says this. John says, I saw. So John, where we're at in Revelation chapter 5, is having his own throne room vision, just like Daniel's having in 7. And John says, then I saw in the right hand of him who was seated on the throne, Ancient of Days, a scroll written within and on the back, sealed with 7 seals. And I saw a mighty angel proclaiming with a loud voice, who is worthy to open the scroll and to break its seals? And no one in heaven and no one on earth and no one under the earth was able to open the scroll or look into it. And I began to weep, John says, loudly, because no one was found worthy to open the scroll and look into it. And one of the elders said to me, it's cool. Weep no more. I inserted that, sorry. Weep no more. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has conquered, so that he can open the scroll and its 7 seals. And between the throne and the 4 living creatures and among the elders, I saw a lamb standing as though it had been slain. In the throne room, the cloud rider. Where's he been? Sacrificing himself so that he could grab the title deed out of the hand of the Ancient of Days. And what we see in Daniel chapter 7, this throne room vision, is Daniel glimpsing this cloud rider back from being victorious over Satan's sin and death and collecting his deed to the kingdom, to the kingship, to all of it, to us, to the souls of men. Like it's fascinating that John doesn't see him glorified as he walks across the room and takes the title deed out of the Father's hand. He sees him in his slain state, You know why? Because that's what he's been doing. That's where he's coming from, right? A redemptive work for the salvation of mankind, right? He had 7 horns, 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent out into all the earth. And he went and he took the scroll from the right hand of him who was seated on the throne. And when he had taken the scroll, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, each holding a harp and golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints. And they sang a new song, saying, "Worthy are you to take the scroll, to open its seals, for you were slain, and by your blood you ransomed people for God from every tribe and language and people and nation, and you have made them a kingdom and priests to our God, and they shall reign on the earth forever." That's what he was doing. That's what the cloud rider is coming from when he comes to the Ancient of Days in Daniel chapter 7. It's amazing. Like, I get chills every time I read Revelation 5 and see the weeping. Like John knows that what the Ancient of Days is holding in that scroll is everything. That our only hope is in that scroll being opened, right? And yet no one's worthy to do it. No one's worthy to open the scroll, but the one who walks bloody and bruised and crushed and tired across the throne room. He takes it out of the Ancient of Days' hands. You know what I mean? That's just crazy stuff to think about, right? So, what is it that how did John the Baptist introduce him when Jesus came to get baptized to the public? "Behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world." There he is, right? There he is, and that's what he was doing, right? We have this scroll, this title deed. 14, let me read this again in Daniel 7. Verse 14 says, "To him was given dominion and glory." It sounds a lot like what the heavenly hosts are singing after Jesus' victory. "And glory and a kingdom, that all people, nations, languages should serve him." Should serve him. So this is all king language. This is all royalty language here, right? Fits perfectly with everything that God's been giving Daniel in this dream. "His dominion's an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed." Basically, I introduced to you the King of Kings, right? This is the King of all kings, no matter what you saw in the beginning of the vision, and what comes out of the sea, and what will come out of the sea, and how powerful and scary and dominant they may appear to be. I introduce you now to the King of Kings, right? This is basically what's being said, the ultimate king of an ultimate kingdom, right? And it's at this point in the dream, like, how bad do you think Daniel needs to see this? You know what I mean? Like, I think he needed to see it pretty bad, because we need to remember his current context and his people's current context and circumstance, which is that they are enslaved, right? In Babylon. They're in captivity. They're exiles, right? They're ruled by one of the beasts of the current ruling kingdom. You know what I mean? And what's God saying to him? "Hey, Daniel, it ain't going to be like this forever, right? It's not going to be like this forever." And I just think he needed to hear this so bad. And so he's anxious, and he's stirred, and he's perplexed, and he's alarmed on multiple levels, and he's ready to hear what it means, right? Which is what we get in 15 through 18. "As for me, Daniel, my spirit within me was anxious, and the visions of my head alarmed me, and I approached the one who stood there, angel, messenger, watcher, whatever you want to call him, right? And asked him the truth concerning all of this. And so he told me, he made it known to me, the interpretation of these things. The 4 Greek beasts are 4 kings who will arise out of the earth." And it's just kind of matter of fact. But the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever and ever. And thus we have the one statement that summarizes this entire thing. If there's anything that you and I need to walk out of here with that's applicable, that's life-giving, that's encouraging, it's found in this one verse here, and it's 17, and it's basically could be wrapped up in 2 words. God wins. God wins. This is why, as your pastors, sometimes we get so bummed and so discouraged when we see some of you guys give yourselves to the current political moment. It's because God wins, regardless of what the current political moment looks like. If we are Christians and we believe our Bibles, this transcends whatever you see right in front of you. God wins. I have gone through some crap seasons in my life, and I'm sure that some of you have as well. And the only thing that's kept me getting out of bed and moving forward and not sabotaging myself or other people around me is this truth. God wins. No matter what you feel in the moment or what you are struggling with or what you are going through, God wins. God wins. In fact, Christ went to the cross. He actually went through with that, which was ahead of him, knowing how bad it was, because he knew that the Father wins. And he wins. God wins. The Christian has a benefit that allows them to not get caught up in the moment, in that we know the rest of the story. We know the rest of the story. We know how it all ends, and guess what? It ends very good. It ends very good for those who are in Christ, right? When it comes to movies and shows, you have spoiler alerts sometimes, you know what I mean? It's like, don't tell me what happens. You know what I mean? Like they stink, but with the future of the world and mankind, like it's rad. It's pretty fantastic that we have the spoiler alert, like right in front of us. This is pretty cool. Like with a movie, I hate it because it ruins the payoff, right, of the surprise. You know what I mean? But with future history, it changes everything because it dispels the possibility of a negative surprise. Not to mention the way that it causes and affects the way that I live now. Like I was saying earlier, knowing this changes the way that I live now. It changes how I look at things. It changes how I persevere. It changes how patient I am. It changes how I love and where I go and what I do and what I say. Just knowing these two words, God wins. Big, scary beasts will come out of the sea, and they have come out of the sea, but God in his transcendent kingship follows it, crushes it, and establishes itself forever in the end. Forever in the end. And the people of God lived happily ever after. The end. Right? I mean, we have that here. Like the saints get the kingdom. Like regardless of who's like vying for position right now and what they look like and how big and bad they look, the saints get the kingdom. Right? It's delivered to the saints. Right? I do this with like hockey games. I know none of you like hockey, but I do. So hang with me for a second. So I have a West Coast team. And because most of the teams are East Coast and you got the time changes, my West Coast games are like, they're super late so that they can fit all their games in over there because no one cares about West Coast teams. Anyway, bottom line is the older I get, the harder I have a time staying up and watching the end of the game. And so sometimes I'll just go to sleep. And I'll get up in the morning and I'll pull out my phone and I'll look at my app and I'll see who won that game. And I'll see that my team won. And I'll go, oh, that's cool. I'm going to go watch the highlights. And that game could be looking wrong. Like as you're watching the game, you're going like, wait, did I get the score right on the right game? Because like everything's wrong about this. Like they're getting their butts kicked. There's no possible way they're going to come back. There's no possible way that they won. You know what I mean? But I know that they won. So I keep, and then they end up winning, you know? And that's kind of what this is, you know? Like it's gonna look weird, it's gonna look gnarly, it's gonna look questionable sometimes, guys. But the game is fixed. Like it's set. It's done, as if it's already been done. God wins. And that can affect the way that we live now. What we do now. How we treat each other now. Even how we worship now. How we press into him. How we cling to him. How we chase after him. All right? God wins. I got to cut a bunch of this. I'll close with this. I don't want to close without saying this. Every single one of us is going to have our day in court. This is the part that maybe you don't want to think about or I don't want to preach, but is what it's all about. We're all going to have our day in court. Every single one of us, right? If what Daniel saw here is true, your court date is set. Mine is set. You know? Like our day in court before the Most High, most just judge is coming. And what are you going to say? You know what I mean? Like what are you going to hear when you stand before the Ancient of Days? What are you going to hear? What is he going to reveal? What does he have written down on you? You know? Like what's the evidence against you? What will be your defense? Who will be your defendant? Your attorney, right? Do you have one is the question. Because you're going to need one. Right? Like I can promise anybody that self-legal representation there is going to be a lot worse than it is here. Like it's not going to hold up. It's not going to go well. In fact, it's impossible. You cannot win the dirt that God has on you. You cannot win against it. Right? Books will be open. Your rap sheet's going to be exposed, studied, exacted. All the charges ever brought against you for anything you've ever done, big or small, will be weighed by he who searches all things. Right? There will be stuff about you that you didn't even know about yourself that falls short of the glory of God, that he knows. It will be so incriminating that no one will be able to stand. No one will walk on the charges that are presented unless the Lamb of God who was slain before the foundation of the world walks across the floor to represent you, right? Unless you have the attorney. Unless you have the one who has purchased the title deed to your soul and your sins. It's funny, we think that we have time, don't we? And I know I'm preaching to the choir in large part, but there's people in here who probably need to hear this. We think we have time. I just went to a memorial service, last week for a 24-year-old kid of my best friend, his son. And there was nothing wrong with this kid. He was healthy, 24 years old, handsome, smart, funny, didn't do drugs, didn't do alcohol. And he just didn't wake up one morning. He just didn't wake up. Every breath that we take is the grace of God and the mercy of God. And he knows. And so we cannot sit around and say, oh, I'll get to it tomorrow. Or I'll wait till my life gets bad and my back's up against the wall, and then I'll maybe test out God. You know what I mean? Like, what a presumption that you have that coming. Right? Today's the day of salvation. And you have a court date. You know what I mean? And you're not going to be able to miss it. You know what I mean? Like you're going to have to appear. And when you do, what do you got? You've either got all the crap that you've ever done that falls short of the glory of God, or you've got Jesus. And that's the difference between who walks to the left and who walks to the right. And I would pray that each one of you are banking completely and solely on the work of Christ, not your own, right? I know that for me, by faith, that day's going to go favorably for me. That it's not going to end in all the ways that I've blown it like it should. It's going to win in all the ways that he's achieved it for me. You know what I mean? And I want that for you. So by faith, we look to Christ, believing that he was the Son of God, that he died on the cross for your sins, every single one of them, big and small, past, present, future. And then when he rose from the grave, like he wrote a check on that cross, and when he rose from the grave, the check cleared, which means that you are now clear, that you are now righteous before the Ancient of Days. And right now, he's sitting at the right hand of the Ancient of Days with that title deed under his arm, right? He's purchased it all to assure that you and I, it's going to go well for us when we get to court, right? All right, rambling. Lord, thank you. Thank you for leaving your rightful place in glory, traveling far from the throne room of the Ancient of Days to become a lamb slain for people like us. It doesn't seem fair, but I receive it. It's all I've got. You're our only hope. And I thank you for providing a way for sinners to be saved. I thank you that no matter what we see going on politically, economically, military-wise, war-wise, that you have won. That we don't have to cower, we don't have to fear. You won. And I pray that your people would be filled with the knowledge of that in a way that affects every aspect of their life and what they do. God, make us a people that goes out into this darkness with this bright light of the truth that you have won, and your Son has won, and therefore the saints have won. So thank you for Daniel's vision, that he wrote it down, that he preserved it, so that people like us 5,000 years later can sit around and look at it and go, wow, there's God, there's the gospel, there's our hope. So we thank you this morning in your name. Amen.